I'm starting to think I was maybe a bit too harsh on Psychonauts, because all the platforming games I've tried since then have been pretty underwhelming in comparison. So much so that I really don't feel like doing full reviews for any of them. So here's my quick 2 cents on a bunch of PS2 platformer games. First up we have Haven: Call of the King. When it comes to the story, characters, and gameplay, it's fine, I guess. It's decent, but nothing about it really grabbed me. Jak 2. Now I quite liked Jak and Daxter, as I think it nails the platforming formula down really well, and it has a really good sense of humor too. Jak 2, however, is quite different in terms of gameplay structure and tone. It has a distinctly different feel from the first game, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. The changes are interesting, and I can see why the game was acclaimed when it first came out. But for me it sucked out most of what I liked about the first game, and while it's not bad, it just wasn't my cup of tea. Klonoa 2: Lunatea's Veil. Klonoa Empire of Dreams is one of my favorite games of all time, and I also quite enjoyed Door to Phantomile for the original PlayStation. How does Lunatea's Veil compare? It's okay. It's another Klonoa game, and if you like Klonoa, you'll like this just fine. I enjoyed it well enough, but it was a bit too similar to Door to Phantomile for me to really get into. It does have some new elements and ideas, but not that many. Still, it's fun enough, I suppose. Kaya: Dark Lineage. A game about a brother and sister who get sucked into a parallel dimension, and the sister has to go save the brother. A fairly standard platformer, it's once again fine in terms of story and gameplay. The main character is likable, and I do appreciate how the introduction gets straight to the point. But once again, nothing about the game really grabbed me. Legend of K. Now this is a rather interesting game. It feels like whoever made this game wanted to make something grand and epic like a Zelda game, but didn't quite have the budget or the talent to pull it off. It's not a bad game, but it's just kind of awkward. For one, it has really clumsy world building. For an example of how to do world building right, I'll cite Avatar: The Last Airbender, since I've been rewatching it lately. Among the many things that Avatar: The Last Airbender does right, it does a good job of setting things up. There's 4 elements, namely water, earth, fire, and air. There are also 4 nations, 1 nation for each element, and the Fire Nation are the bad guys. Got it. Meanwhile, in Legend of K, the setting is the island of Yenching. At the beginning of the game, it's established that the island is the home of 4 races of anthropomorphic animals, namely cats, hares, frogs, and pandas. Got it. However, it's been invaded by gorillas and rats. Okay. And the rats are alchemists. Also, there's other animals such as bears, which are also anthropomorphic, but then there's animals that aren't anthropomorphic, like the boars. Just, what? The world building is really confusing, and while the game does explain more as you go along, things never fully make sense. The main character is a young cat named Kay, who lives with other cats in his home village, and isn't happy about the occupation by the gorilla and rat forces. He aspires to become a great warrior in order to eventually drive them out, and after they shut down the school he was training at, he decides to go ahead and embark on his hero's journey. He's a fairly standard protagonist, but he is a likable character. And while he does seem rather inexplicably skilled at combat once he sets out, at least they take the time to establish that he did a lot of training with his master, and his skills don't materialize out of thin air, unlike some other characters I could mention. But while he's a decent character, he's not enough to carry the game's story, particularly since the world building and overall narrative is pretty clunky. A good example is that there's no clear impetus to adventure. The rats and gorillas are just kind of being jerks, and that's it. Kay is even straight up rude and disrespectful to them multiple times near the beginning, to their faces no less, and they don't retaliate, so they're pretty laid back for a totalitarian regime. Granted, they do some more evil things later, but it's fairly standard video game bad guy stuff that's hard to take seriously. Wind Waker is a good example of how to have a clear and powerful call to adventure. You're hanging out on your peaceful home island, and boom, your sister gets kidnapped by a gigantic bird. Clear threat and motivation to head out into the world. And when you go to rescue her, you end up being defeated pretty easily, demonstrating how powerful your enemies are and how far you have to go in order to become strong enough to defeat them. Legend of K doesn't really have any strong moments like that. And so while the humorous moments are pretty effective, the moments that try to be more serious or dramatic are not. Gameplay-wise, it's just kind of okay. It's got some decent combat, some decent platforming, some decent puzzle solving, but it's pretty linear, and everything it does has been done before and better. But while the game overall is just kind of okay, you do get a sense of passion behind it. Whoever made the game was clearly trying and poured their heart into it, and it's hard to fault the game for aspiring to greatness, even if it didn't succeed. It's nothing exceptional, but it's fine, and despite all the negative things I said about it, I would still recommend giving it a shot. Ratchet & Clank. Now here's a game that's been on my list ever since I started on the PlayStation 2's library. I played it, there were parts I really liked, and there's nothing really wrong with it, but for some reason it just never really grabbed me. But to be totally fair, I'll go over the things I liked. I really like the chemistry between Ratchet and Clank. Ratchet is more of a cold, calculating, pragmatic sort of guy, while Clank is more idealistic, hopeful, and earnest. Given that Clank is a literal robot, you'd think it would be the other way around, but this is a subversion I like, and the way the two personalities interact and bounce off each other is interesting and entertaining. I also liked the satirical aspects of the story and the clear anti-corporate message. In a world where there are far too many people willing to be unpaid corporate shills, the commentary in this game is something I really appreciated. As for the gameplay, it's good. I honestly can't really think of anything wrong with the gameplay without resorting to nitpicking, so I'll just say it's good. But while it was good, it just wasn't drawing me in the way that Insomniac's older games did. Overall, I can say that Ratchet & Clank is a good game, I just couldn't get into it. Not really sure why, but that's just how it is. And since this video is getting a bit long, I'm going to split it into 2 parts. See you next week.